On June 6, 1961, Carl Jung died in his home in Switzerland. He was 85 years old. His body failed him, but his mind remained sharp until the very end. And in those final weeks, something changed. The man who spent his entire life exploring the human mind saw something that terrified him. This wasn't about dreams or symbols anymore. This was a warning so dark that even today, most people refuse to talk about it. What did Jung see in those final moments that made him fear for humanity's future? What revelation was so disturbing that it has been quietly buried by mainstream psychology? Today, you'll discover what Carl Jung's final message really was, and why it might be the most important warning ever given about the human mind. Jung was dying, and he knew it. His heart was failing, his body was shutting down, but his mind was more active than ever. In his last days, he talked about something he called the God image. Not God himself, but the image of God that lives inside every human mind. And he said this image was dying. Humanity was killing it, not through science or reason, but through something far more dangerous, mass unconsciousness. But to understand why this terrified him, you need to know what Jung discovered in his final decades. He spent years studying medieval alchemy as a map of the human soul. He developed synchronicity, suggesting the universe connects events through meaning, not just cause and effect. He realized that life has two completely different purposes. These weren't just theories. They were observations from decades of watching human minds. And what he saw made him understand something horrible. Modern humanity was heading away from psychological health, away from wholeness, away from what makes us human. This is where Jung's warning gets terrifying. He didn't see humanity evolving toward enlightenment. He saw the opposite. He saw people losing their individual souls to a collective madness, a psychological end of the world. Not fire and brimstone, but something worse, the death of the inner self. In 1952, just 9 years before his death, Jung published something that shocked the scientific world. He called it synchronicity. What he discovered was this: events in your life don't just happen through cause and effect. Sometimes they happen through meaning. A patient dreams of a golden scarab beetle. The next day, a rare golden scarab appears at Jung's window during their session. No physical cause connects these events, but the meaning connects them perfectly. Jung worked with quantum physicist Wolfgang Pauli to understand this. They realized something profound. Mind and matter aren't separate. There's a deeper layer of reality where psychological states and physical events arise from the same source. The universe doesn't just respond to your actions, it responds to your psychological state. But here's why this discovery made his final warning so much darker. If the inner world and outer world are connected through meaning, then what happens when an entire civilization loses its inner world? The outer world reflects that emptiness back. Meaninglessness spreads, and nobody understands why. Most people know Jung as the man who gave us archetypes and the collective unconscious, the safe version of Jung, the one who talked about finding yourself and integrating your shadow. But there was another Jung, a darker Jung, the one who saw what happens when an entire civilization loses touch with its soul. And in his final days, that's exactly what he warned us about. Jung spent decades studying the human mind. He saw patterns others missed. He understood that beneath our modern lives, ancient forces still operate. Primal energies, deep instincts, the things we try to forget. And he saw what happens when we ignore these forces for too long. They don't disappear. They grow stronger. They wait. And then they erupt. This is when Jung made another discovery that would define his final years. He spent the last decades of his life obsessed with medieval alchemy. Not the chemistry of turning lead into gold, but what the alchemists were really doing. They were projecting their inner psychological transformation onto matter. Jung published his final masterwork on this in 1955. What he discovered was this: every time an alchemist tried to transform lead into gold, they were unconsciously describing the transformation of the human soul. The process had 3 stages: Nigredo, the blackening, when you confront your shadow, when everything falls apart; depression, breakdown, the dark night of the soul. Most people get stuck here. They medicate it, distract from it, run from it. Then Albedo, the whitening. Clarity, you start to see yourself clearly. The ego separates from the unconscious. You gain insight. Finally, Rubedo, the reddening, the union of opposites. This is wholeness. This is what Jung called individuation. This is the gold the alchemists were really seeking. But modern society has made this process almost impossible. We've created a world that keeps people stuck in the first stage. Constant distraction, endless entertainment. We never allow the darkness to complete. We never descend deep enough to find the gold hidden in our own psychological lead. In his last writings, Jung talked about the modern world creating a split, a separation between the conscious mind and the unconscious. People living entirely in their heads, disconnected from their instincts, from their bodies, from their souls. This wasn't progress, Jung said. This was the beginning of a psychological apocalypse. Think about the world Jung saw in 1961. Nuclear weapons, the Cold War. He had watched World War II tear Europe apart. He saw millions follow madmen into destruction. And he knew why. Empaths aren't broken. They're alchemists in progress. The Alchemist's Path gives you drills, Jung-based boundaries, and 3 exclusive chapter videos to turn overwhelm into clarity. By Surreal Mind, 236-page downloadable ebook, in stock. Begin now at thesurrealmind.com. The loss of the individual soul. When people lose touch with their inner world, they become possessed by forces they can't control. Jung watched ordinary people transform into monsters, not because they were evil, but because they were empty. They had no inner compass. They were perfect vessels for possession by collective rage and fear. This is what haunted Jung, the realization that it could happen again, that it was already happening again. Jung's final message was this: the God image is dying inside humanity, and when it dies completely, something else will take its place. Something ancient and terrible. The unconscious mind will rise up and devour everything. Not literally, but psychologically. People will lose themselves to ideologies, to mass movements, to collective insanity. They won't know who they are anymore. They'll become empty shells, filled with whatever the crowd tells them to believe. This is happening right now. Look around you. How many people do you know who think for themselves? How many have their own values, their own beliefs, their own identity? Most people are copies. They repeat what they hear. They believe what they're told. They follow the herd. This is what Jung feared, the death of individual consciousness. But here's what makes it even more disturbing. Jung said this process is invisible to most people. They don't realize they're losing themselves. They think they're becoming more educated, more evolved, more enlightened. But actually they're becoming less human. They're becoming functions, roles, masks with nothing behind them. The modern world trains you to ignore your inner life, your dreams, your intuitions, your deep feelings. It tells you these things don't matter. What matters is productivity, efficiency, fitting in, following the rules, being normal, and slowly, without realizing it, you lose contact with your soul. The God image inside you starts to fade, and when it's gone, you're no longer yourself. You're just another part of the machine. Jung saw this happening on a massive scale, not just to individuals, but to entire societies, millions of people living without souls, going through the motions, existing but not really alive. This is the apocalypse he warned about. Not the end of the world, but the end of the inner world, the death of the self. Now think about today, social media, constant connectivity, Information overload. Everyone thinking the same thoughts, using the same words, following the same trends. This is exactly what Jung feared. Individual minds disappearing into the mass. The algorithm knows you better than you know yourself. It feeds you exactly what will keep you scrolling. You think you're making choices, but you're being shaped, molded, and you don't even notice. Everyone around you is having the same conversations, sharing the same outrage, not because these things matter to you personally, but because the collective has decided they matter. And you've lost the ability to tell the difference. Jung said when the God image dies, people lose their center. They have nothing inside to hold on to. They become desperate for meaning, and that's when they become dangerous. They'll grab onto anything that promises to fill the void, any ideology, any movement. They'll surrender their freedom just to feel like they belong. This is how totalitarianism happens, not through force, but through emptiness. People who have lost their souls will give themselves to anyone who offers them an identity. They'll stop questioning, stop thinking, and they'll do terrible things while convinced they're doing good. Jung saw this pattern throughout history. He studied it, documented it, understood it, and in his final days, he saw it happening again. The same forces rising, the same emptiness spreading, the same loss of soul infecting millions. He knew what was coming, and it terrified him. The warning gets worse. Jung said, once the God image dies inside enough people, there's a tipping point. The collective unconscious becomes so powerful that it starts to possess entire cultures. Madness becomes normal, insanity becomes organized, evil becomes systematic, and the few people who still have souls, who still think for themselves, become the outcasts, the troublemakers, the dangerous ones. You're living through this right now. Notice how anyone who questions the dominant narrative gets attacked, silenced, cancelled. The collective can't tolerate individuals anymore. It sees them as threats, because individuals remind the masses of what they've lost, the soul they sacrificed for acceptance. Jung's final revelation was this: consciousness is the only defense. The only way to resist the death of the God image is to become radically conscious of who you really are, to maintain contact with your inner world no matter what the outer world demands, to think your own thoughts, feel your own feelings, live your own truth. This is harder than it sounds. It means standing alone, being misunderstood, going against the crowd, but it's the only way to keep your soul alive. The psychological apocalypse Jung warned about isn't coming. It's already here. Look at how people live, how they think, how they behave. Most are sleepwalking, operating on autopilot, repeating what they've been programmed to repeat. They've lost touch with the depths, with the mystery, with the God image that makes them human. Jung understood something most people miss. The unconscious mind is not your friend. It's not all about healing and integration and finding your authentic self. That's part of it, yes. But there's another part, a darker part. The unconscious also contains chaos, destruction, madness. When you lose contact with it, it doesn't stay quiet. It rises up, takes over, possesses you without you even knowing. This is what Jung saw happening to humanity, the unconscious taking revenge. People think they're rational, logical, in control, but actually they're possessed by forces they don't understand, ancient drives, primal fears, collective delusions, and because they're unconscious of these forces, they can't resist them. They become puppets, acting out patterns that are thousands of years old. The final message wasn't about hope. It wasn't inspirational. It was a cold, hard truth. Most people will lose this battle. They'll surrender their souls without a fight. They'll become part of the mass, the collective, the horde, and they won't even realize what they've lost. They'll think they're happy, normal, successful, but inside, they'll be empty, dead, hollowed out. But here's the twist Jung left us with. This doesn't have to be your fate. You can choose differently. You can refuse to give up your soul. You can maintain your connection to the God image, but it requires something most people won't do. It requires you to suffer, to be alone, to endure the pain of being conscious in an unconscious world. Every day you face this choice: conform or stay true, fit in or stand out, follow the crowd or walk your own path. Most people choose comfort, safety, belonging, and with each choice, they lose a little more of themselves. Until one day there's nothing left, just a shell, a mask, a function. Jung saw this happening everywhere, in schools, in corporations, in governments, in families, institutions designed to crush individuality, to create obedient workers, compliant citizens, people who don't question, don't rebel, don't think too deeply, people who have sacrificed their God image for security. The terrifying part is how subtle it is. You don't wake up one day and decide to lose your soul. It happens gradually, one compromise at a time, one surrender at a time, one moment of going along to get along, and before you know it, you can't remember who you really are. Jung's final warning was this: the God image doesn't die all at once. It fades, slowly, quietly, and most people never notice until it's too late, until they look inside and find nothing there. Just echoes of other people's voices, other people's beliefs, other people's lives. This is the apocalypse of the soul, not fire from the sky, but emptiness from within, not the destruction of the world, but the destruction of the self. And Jung saw it spreading like a disease, infecting millions, creating a world of hollow people going through the motions of living without ever truly being alive. So what do you do with this information? How do you resist? Jung's answer was simple, but brutal. You must become conscious, completely conscious. You must know yourself so deeply that nothing can possess you. No ideology, no movement, no collective delusion. You must become an island of awareness in an ocean of unconsciousness. Jung discovered something else in his later years. He made a distinction most people never understand. There's the ego, the center of your conscious awareness. But then there's something deeper. Jung called it the self. This is the organizing principle of your entire psyche. The self is always trying to heal you. Jung noticed that when his patients went through psychological chaos, they would spontaneously draw circular patterns, mandalas. He realized the psyche was creating a symbol of wholeness. The self was trying to bring order to the chaos. Jung drew mandalas himself during his own breakdown. He noticed the mandala he drew reflected his psychological state that day. When he was scattered, the mandala was chaotic. When he found clarity, the mandala was ordered. This is what the self does. It creates symbols to guide you back to integration. Dreams, synchronicities. All of these are the self trying to communicate, trying to show you the path to becoming complete. But modern people don't pay attention to their dreams anymore. They dismiss synchronicities as coincidence. They ignore the symbols their own psyche creates to heal them. And without this guidance from the self, the ego becomes lost, easy to possess. This means doing the inner work nobody wants to do, facing your shadow, confronting your demons, integrating your darkness, understanding your own capacity for evil, for cruelty, for madness. Because if you don't know these things about yourself, they'll control you, they'll use you, they'll turn you into something you never meant to become. It means sitting in silence and noticing how uncomfortable you are. It means asking yourself hard questions and actually listening. It means recognizing when you're just repeating what you've been told versus thinking for yourself. When was the last time you had a truly original thought? Not something you adopted from somewhere else, but something that came from deep within you, something that might set you apart from the crowd. That's consciousness, and it's terrifying. Because once you start thinking for yourself, you can't stop. You start noticing things, patterns, contradictions, lies that everyone else accepts. You start feeling different. Not better, just different. Awake while they're sleeping. Jung spent his whole life teaching this, but in his final days, he realized most people won't do it. They'll choose comfort over consciousness, belonging over being, the collective over the individual. And this is how the God image dies, not through evil, but through laziness, not through hate, but through fear. Fear of being alone, fear of being different, fear of being truly, radically yourself. The modern world makes this choice even harder. Everything is designed to keep you unconscious, distracted, entertained, busy. You're not supposed to think too deeply, feel too much, question too hard. You're supposed to consume, produce, conform, repeat. This is how the system maintains itself, by keeping people asleep, by making consciousness itself seem dangerous. And here's another thing Jung discovered late in his life. He realized that life has two completely different purposes, two halves, and most people never make it to the second one. The first half of life is about building. You develop your ego, create a persona, find a career, start a family, fit into society. This is necessary. But Jung noticed something disturbing. Most people try to keep living this way forever. But this leads straight to neurosis. The afternoon of life must have a significance of its own. The second half of life isn't about building anymore. It's about individuation, turning inward, integrating the parts of yourself you rejected to fit in. This is where most people fail. They hit midlife and panic. They chase the same goals that worked in the first half. More money, more status, more validation. And they wonder why they feel empty. Jung understood what they don't. The second half requires a completely different approach. You're not supposed to conquer the outer world anymore. You're supposed to explore the inner world, face your shadow, find meaning instead of achievement. But modern culture has no place for this. It keeps pushing first half values onto second half people, productivity, youth, external success. And millions in the second half of life are living the wrong script, wondering why they feel so lost. But consciousness is the only thing that can save you. Not belief, not faith, not hope. Consciousness, brutal, unflinching awareness of who and what you really are. This is what Jung meant by integrating the God image, not becoming divine, but becoming fully human, accepting all of yourself, the light and the dark, the good and the evil, the beautiful and the ugly. You have to look at the parts of yourself you've been hiding, the jealousy, the rage, the pettiness, the cruelty you're capable of. Not to indulge these things, but to know they exist, to recognize them when they surface. This separates the conscious person from the possessed person. The conscious person knows their darkness and chooses how to express it. The possessed person denies their darkness and acts it out unconsciously. They hurt others while convinced they're doing good. When you do this, you become immune to mass movements. You can't be manipulated. You can't be possessed. You can't lose yourself because you know yourself too well. This is the armor Jung talked about, the psychological protection that comes from radical self-knowledge. But here's the cost. When you become conscious, you can't go back. You can't unsee what you've seen. You'll see through the lies everyone else believes. You'll notice the patterns everyone else ignores. You'll feel the emptiness that everyone else covers up. This is the burden of consciousness, and most people decide it's too high. They'd rather be comfortable than conscious, rather be accepted than authentic. Jung understood this. He lived it. And in his final days, he looked at humanity and saw it making the wrong choice, choosing unconsciousness, choosing the death of the God image. His final message wasn't hopeful. It was a warning. And now, more than 60 years later, we can see he was right. But you can save yourself. You can choose consciousness. You can refuse to surrender your soul. You can keep the God image alive inside you, even as it dies in millions of others. This is your power, your responsibility, your burden. Jung's final revelation was this: the battle for humanity's soul isn't fought with weapons or words, it's fought inside each individual mind. And most people are losing without even knowing there's a battle happening. The only question that matters is this: will you fight for your soul? Will you do the brutal work of becoming conscious? Will you stand alone if necessary? Most won't. Jung knew this. The God image will die in most people. The masses will lose their souls. And a new dark age will begin. Not of ignorance, but of unconsciousness. Empty people going through empty motions. This was Jung's most disturbing revelation. And if you understand it, you'll never look at the world the same way. You'll see the apocalypse happening right now. In every person who has lost touch with their soul. In every mind that has surrendered to the collective. Carl Jung died knowing this truth, knowing what was coming, knowing that most people would ignore his warning, but he left it for us anyway, for the few who are willing to listen, the few who are willing to fight for their souls, the few who would rather suffer consciously than live comfortably in unconsciousness. His final message is simple. The God image is dying. Humanity is losing its soul. The psychological apocalypse is here, and consciousness is the only defense, the only way to resist, the only hope for those brave enough to stand alone. Now you know what Jung saw in his final days. The dark truth he tried to warn us about. The disturbing revelation that mainstream psychology still tries to ignore. The question is, what will you do with this knowledge? Will you join the masses in unconsciousness? Or will you fight to keep your soul alive? And remember, consciousness is not a gift. It's a choice, a battle, a burden you must choose to carry every single day. Thanks for watching. See you in the next dimension. In the alchemist's path, perception training for empaths, you'll turn overwhelm into wisdom with practical drills, Jung-inspired boundaries, and step-by-step perception training. This guide includes 3 exclusive chapter videos to deepen each lesson. Written by Surreal Mind, 236 pages, beautifully designed 8.5 by 11 downloadable ebook, in stock now. Start your training today. Feel deeply while thinking clearly. Get the Alchemist's Path at thesurrealmind.com.